Hi, I'm Professor Andy Shabilsky, and I am very pleased to present one of the most entertaining but also informative lectures that we do in any given year. We're joined by, and it will be presented by Professor Joss Wright, who is now our Director of Research. He protects elephants and other creatures from being sold through the internet. They go into tubes somehow, and he finds them in those tubes. But it's going to be informative, funny. We should all encourage him by clapping very hard and tell him that it needs to be made into a book, because it should be a chapter amongst other chapters that take ideas that are a bit strange, a bit on the edge, but then applies the kinds of statistical thinking and statistical reasoning that is kind of ideal, regardless of what program you are here at the OII. It is kind of a core kind of way of approaching phenomena, and not just assigning numbers after the fact, but starting with logic and then following through with what operations would make sense if you wanted to uncover one of these strange phenomena. It is extremely important for your awareness that I tell you that this event is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website. I assume also via YouTube or some other site. And so I guess keep those things in mind when you raise your hands and announce your political fealties. Please don't at all. First time I thought about Trump today. Wow, I made it a long time. But in any case, it'll be about 30 to 40 minutes. We ask that you save any questions after that. We have about an hour here. And then, yeah. Anything else? No, it's just really great that I can be here to welcome Joss. And I think we're in for a show. Thanks so much.
Good evening. Yeah, so I am, as Andy said, Joss Wright. I'm the Director of Research here at the OII, which means I get to decide what is acceptable research and what isn't.
That's exactly
why we are having this talk today. As Andy mentioned, it is being recorded today. We've got some very important notices here, but as it's become sort of depressingly traditional, I give these lectures every year, and well, this year I found stuffed into the cooling fan of my GPU a note from the university. It says that the Chancellor, Masters and Scholars of the University of Oxford neither sanction nor condone inquiry into the field of paranormal data science. The application of twisted statistical reasoning to strain the nightmarish fabric of our fragile reality in search of horrors beyond mortal imagination is not fruitful, wise, or in accordance with Part 13 of the University of Oxford Council Regulations 15 of 2002. Students or faculty seeking foolishly to apply naive computational machinery to ask dubious questions, to draw insupportable conclusions from vacuous and poorly curated data are instead directed towards the university's institutional provision of OpenAI's ChatGPT educational license. And I take these things very seriously when they're written in 16-point Comic Sans with some of the more threatening images from the 1996 Microsoft Clip Art library. The university does not mess around. So, what is this? So, a number of years ago, sort of teaching myself statistics and having had a lot of bullying as a child, I decided that I was going to look at various different strange phenomena that were around there in the world, because we have the data for them. We have the data for them now. And so I started a blog called, oh God, it's not called that. It's called that. Right. It's called Weird Data Science. You can find it at www.weirddatascience.net. It's been on a little bit of a hiatus, but you'll find the slides, things like the code, the analyses, and some other things here. So what this idea is to have a look at what we can do statistically with strange and unusual data. But in order to do this, I mean, this is very important for all of us. You know, we're not just doing statistics. We're not just doing sort of, you know, social science or data science. Everything that we do here is framed by context. So if we want to understand the alien, the bizarre, things external to what we normally deal with in the day-to-day life. We need to look back at where this all comes from. And so humanity has seen these strange celestial manifestations throughout our history. There have been stories throughout our legends and our books and our histories of strange lights in the sky, aerial phenomena, angelic beings of strange descriptions, and humans carried off into the sky in what they described as fiery chariots. If you look to the classics, Livy's Ab Urbe Condita recorded things in the year 218 BC. Navium speciem de caelo ad fulcisse. Phantom ships had been seen gleaming in the sky. Moving forward a little bit, in Plutarch's Lucullus, around 100 CE, on a sudden the sky opened and a large luminous body fell down in the midst between the armies, in shape like a hog's head, but in color like melted silver. This wonderful prodigy happened in Phrygia near Optrii. This is a record of a battle where the two armies were facing off against each other, and this strange silvery luminous body fell down between them, and the two armies were so scared that they ran away. If you look at your Ezekiel, book 1, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. And they went one and sort of describing this vision, this prophetic vision. Everyone went straight forward, whither the Spirit was to go. They went, and they turned not when they went. Talking about the wheels and the expectations that he only ever seen wheels on a cart. But when these wheels moved, they didn't turn, they just kind of moved on their own. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of a beryl. That's green, for those of you who aren't gem addicts. And they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work were, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. You can see here on the slide, this interpretation. Again, when they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up with them. So, landing gear going up. Of course, Ezekiel, in his exile in Babylon in, 593, 571 BCE, had not seen sorry, was it 572 BCE? Yes, wasn't aware of landing gear on an aircraft, but described it perfectly for us. And then moving forward, coming forward 1,000 years, 2,000 years or so, a report in a broadsheet, a precursor to a newspaper in Nuremberg in 1561. At first, there appeared in the middle of the sun 2 blood-red semicircular arcs, just like the moon in its last quarter. And in the sun, above and below and on both sides, the color was blood. There stood a round ball of partly dull, partly black, ferrous color. Likewise, they stood on both sides, and as a torus around the sun, such blood-red ones and other balls in large number, about 3 in a line and 4 in a square. This was an aerial, described actually as a battle, that was reported in Nuremberg in 1561. And similarly, 5 years later, 1566 in Basel, it happened 3 times, on the 27th and 28th of July, on the 7th of August, against the sunrise and sunset. We saw strange shapes in the sky above Basel. At the dawn of the 7th of August, we saw large black spheres coming and going with great speed and precipitation before the sun, and chattered as if they led a fight. Many of them were fiery red and soon crumbled and then extinguished. A description from 1566 of an apparent aerial battle in the skies above Basel. Moving into the modern era and some of the UFO sightings that you might be familiar with, in Washington, D.C. in 1952, there was a very, very famous case where 7 flying objects were seen moving rapidly over Washington, D.C., detected on radar. They weren't just visually seen, they were picked up on radar. Pilots were scrambled to intercept them and to sort of chase them and see what they were. And the pilots described them as white, tailless, fast-moving lights. And the quote from one of the pilots that I love, their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft. Moving forward to what I'm going to call the modern era, because of how old I am. In Rendlesham Forest in the UK in 1980, a series of reported sightings in Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, in December 1980, close to a US Air Force base, RAF Woodbridge, which was being used by the US Air Force. Servicemen and a craft was said to have been downed. Servicemen initially thought it was a downed aircraft, but when they went to the forest to investigate, they saw a glowing object, metallic in appearance with coloured lights. The response to this is the UK Ministry of Defence performed a full investigation and said it was no threat to national security, so we've stopped looking at it. We didn't find anything else there. Now, as scientists, the first thing that we're sort of trained and taught to do is to say that correlation does not equal causation. We say that right at the start of a lot of our papers, and then we pretend that it's otherwise for all the findings that we have and try to give people the impression that it is. And so I don't want to draw too much of a line between correlation and causation here, but I would like to point out that this is about 8 or 9 months before I was born. About 50 or 60 miles from where I was born. Not claiming anything, just correlation. And then, of course, Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, a crash and reported recovery of debris from what was described as a flying saucer near Corona, New Mexico. The wreckage was gathered by personnel from the nearby Roswell Army Airfield. It was initially claimed to be a weather balloon. They said, yeah, this is just a standard silvery weather balloon, it's fine. And then following sort of further investigations and further claims being made about it, it was eventually claimed that it was a high altitude surveillance balloon as part of US Project Mogul, which was about sort of spy high altitude balloons. But the people that originally found it and the participants claimed that the materials acted like nothing made on this earth. They said they were sort of silvery, could be crumpled up like tinfoil, but then they instantly sprung back to their original form with no wrinkles or remnants of that. And then this caused a wave of over 800 related sightings in the summer and autumn of 1947. And so in response to this, sightings, we've got this idea that this is happening. The US government started a large-scale, long-term systematic study of what were called UFO phenomena, unidentified flying objects, which ran from 1952 to around 1969, apparently. It was chiefly concerned, and so their focus was not, are these real, not are these wrong, what is the cause of this? It was chiefly concerned with these being national security. Is this a threat to the national security of the United States? And eventually, in 1968, it concluded in a report called the Condon Report, which drew on the data that they had gathered directly from their own investigations, but also civilian interviews and things like that. And they concluded that the study of UFOs was unlikely to result in significant scientific discoveries. How wrong they were. I love this. I love this. This is one of the visualizations that they produced as part of their, this is part of the Project Blue Book outputs. Back in the days when creating graphs was not a few lines of Python code or R code, that you actually sort of got your pencil and paper and drafting thing. But you can see here, sort of these were the sightings across that sort of summer going into the autumn. You see this sort of huge spike when there was the 7 objects in the sky over Washington, DC. And so, they sort of, again, they drew correlations without claiming causation. They said, like, this is when this magazine article was, this magazine article, this is when there was a huge incident in Washington, DC. And so we can start to see the stirrings, the early birth of people saying, should we look at the data? Like, should we see what we can find out from this? And we're going to try and follow that line further along. But things actually haven't stopped entirely. US Code 3373 from 2022, the establishment of the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. It would take a lot for me to take a job with the US government. But guys, if you're interested, this is, you have my email address. But what this code puts forward is not later than 120 days after December the 23rd, the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Director of National Intelligence, establish an office, blah, 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 to carry out the duties of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Again, just send me a job application, I'm there. As in effect on December 26, 2021, and other such duties as required by this section, including those pertaining to unidentified anomalous phenomena. Interesting term that you see coming out here. Well, most of us familiar with the term UFO, unidentified flying object. If you want to pass yourself off as an insider, UFO, we don't say UFO, they're UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Now, previously, they were always referred to as unidentified aerial phenomena. However, what you'll see in the latest NASA reports, which you're obviously going to go and read because you're here, is that they now include not only aerial phenomena, but submerged and transmedium phenomena as well. So it's not just in the air, there's the unidentified underwater objects and those that travel from the air to the sea and the sea to the air. So submersible and transmedia. Okay. So this leads me to what is effectively the thesis of this talk. And in fact, the thesis of what I'm going to call my research agenda. Many past studies have been carried out of UFOs, UAPs, and similar kind of fringe phenomena. But they've been largely qualitative. And there's nothing wrong with that, for any, qualitative people in the room. It tends to give you a focus on deep but narrow analyses of a particular phenomenon. I'm going to go and I'm going to look into the Roswell case. I'm going to look at the Kentucky Goblins case from the 1980s. Make notes. These are brilliant. But what's happened in a limited sense, we saw the sort of stirrings of it in Project Blue Book. There's been limited application of the large-scale statistical inference tools that we now have available to us. And so, without any kind of fear or favor, without any kind of caution, let's throw things aside and apply the tools that we've now got, machine learning, statistical inference, to these inexplicable phenomena such as UFO sightings. But to do that, we need data. We need something to work with. Unfortunately, there are several projects going back to the 1950s with a particular focus on the United States that have data sources. And there's three sort of main ones I'll list here. There's the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. There's the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and there's the National UFO Reporting Center, NUFORC. All of these have got relatively large data sets. The National UFO Reporting Center one has, what's a delicate way to say this, has previously become available in certain forms. People scrape the website. Now, if you try and scrape the website, you get blocked very, very quickly. Ask me how I know. But at the same time, these are ones that I did actually reach out to the Mutual UFO Network to ask if I could have access to their database, but they said no. Actually, they didn't say anything at all. But I'll try again. So right, we've got this data. We've got this NUFORC data. The NUFORC data represents sightings from about they go back, but sort of realistically starting in the 1950s. And going on to about 2013 is where the analysis we've got here going up to. And so we've got this data set. We've got sightings of UFOs. How do we first approach this? What's the first thing that we do? So explore visual analysis. Our brains are excellent pattern recognition tools. And by visualizing the data, we get a feel for it. Our mind starts to sort of see what's going on there. And so this gives us an opportunity to sort of plunge into the data. As a first step in this, let's think about the spatial elements. Think about the geography. Where are these things happening? What shadow are the aliens casting over our unsuspecting world? Are these sightings independent of geography? As in, do they just happen randomly everywhere? Are they, as depressingly skeptical people say, just associated with population centers because there's more people to see them? You can leave the room if you were going to answer that question. How has ubiquitous personal surveillance equipment, the things that you carry in your pockets all the time, affected the documentation? Why, people ask, have UFO sightings mysteriously declined now that everyone has a smartphone with a camera on it? We'll look into that. So here we go. This is a global distribution of UFO sightings going back to 1910 to 2013. And as you can see, the aliens are more interested in the United States now, presumably out of some kind of morbid curiosity. There is a relative sort of relatively high density in Europe as well, but you know there is a distribution all over the world. I love the fact that there's one down in Antarctica here. You know, it is a, you know, I pulled out the report. It literally just says, you know, I think it was a glowing green rectangle that appeared for 3 minutes and just went by the Antarctic Ross ice shelf, I think was what it was called. I have to say that going through all of these reports of unidentified flying objects, my favorite report was from, I think it was 2000, it was the 27th of October, 2013. Social life, lack of, in Hawaii.
I was there then.
Was it you?
No, but I was there for the psychology conference.
That's, well, I mean, this might explain a lot, actually.
Just hired.
Pharmaceutical
I was
sense.
just hired.
But the report that was associated with this unidentified flying object was, I definitely could not identify this flying object. I just, the poetry of it and the human experience, it's my favorite one of them all. But zooming into to more important places, we can see that, okay, you know, I'll give you this. The aliens are more interested in the major population centers around the United Kingdom. However, if we this is a what's called a kernel density plot that sort of takes all the sightings and gives you a smooth gradient between them to show where things are most sort of high temperature, as it were. And this one, you can see that despite the fact that this area of the country is very sparsely populated, it's actually an area of like a national forest. That's the hotspot. This is where Rendlesham Forest is, where the sighting from 1980 was. And yeah, so the UK is not sort of unknown here, and you can just see sort of little tinges up here in the sort of far north, where strange alien creatures roam in the UK. And then yes, let's look at the United States. Now, what a lot of people say, again, sort of sad, depressing, skeptical people say, is that, come on, people are just seeing US aircraft. You know, they're just seeing like military aircraft, maybe experimental aircraft. So what this diagram represents is a plot where each little white dot that you can see there represents an active US military Air Force base at time of production. And this little red dot is the famous Area 51, which was most closely associated with the New Mexico Roswell crash. And so what you can see from this is that, yes, it is very, very clear that the aliens are interested in our military technologies. They're interested in seeing how we are improving in terms of our aircraft. They're interested in keeping track of us. And they're not particularly interested in areas of low population where there's little threat to them. So this gives us some idea of the aims and the goals behind what they're doing. And in response to somebody who tried to argue with me on Twitter, who said, isn't it funny how all these aliens have stopped turning up now that we have smartphones? This graph is a bit tricky to interpret, and I apologize, but I created it in a sort of frantic, infuriated half hour. This is what we can see here is this blue line at the top is just a general sort of increase in global population. These are all normalized, so you can put them on the same axes and have a meaningful interpretation. The blue is the population of the world going up. The dark purple line is the number of people with cell phones, the number of cell phones in the population, and the yellow line starting in around sort of 2012 is the rise of the smartphone era, when more and more people had smartphones. And what you can clearly see, correlation does not equal causation, is that the UFO sightings have spiked massively in the years since people have had smartphones. So contrary to this sort of common myth, I do hate it when people believe strange conspiracy theories with no basis in fact, this increase in smartphones has actually led to a vast increase in the number of sightings of UFOs we see around the world. So that's a sort of brief initial look, very kind of, descriptive statistics. We're looking at what's there, we're plotting it out, we're trying to bring our mind to it. And we're going to continue with that, but less focused on the spatial elements and start thinking about the nature of the things we're studying, the covariates, if you will. So UAPs have been reported in a wide variety of shapes and sizes throughout history. You saw from Plutarch that there was a silvery pithos, the classic amphora wine jar shape. You've got the classic flying saucer, but then you've got various others. And these shapes, do they consistently appear in one time period or another? Are the aliens changing their tactics or their techniques? Are we seeing different waves of aliens from different places around the universe? Fortunately, the National UFO Report logs not only the time and the date and the location, but also the shape. And so what we can see is if we split these out, overall, you can see that by far the most widely reported shape of a UFO sighting is just a light in the sky. It was reported as a light in the sky. There is a reasonable other category, as you normally expect with these. But then circles come in next, but then triangles. Triangles are very, very popular. Fireballs, we could potentially put those under lights. And again, we've got this sort of, as you start to get down to the bottom, there aren't as many teardrop-shaped ones. There aren't that many cones, and crosses are pretty unpopular in general. But again, how does this change over time? Well, if we plot this out and we sort of start to do it, for a start, this graph shows you just how the number of sightings increased around the 2000s, the number of them in total. And so this kind of stacked bar chart shows us the main categories of them, not so easily interpretable. So let's normalize it out. So we're just looking at proportions rather than absolute numbers. So we can do this. And you can see that over time, this traditional the traditional round shape very much dominated the number of sightings from the 1950s through to the sort of late 90s. And then you've got this increase in triangular shaped objects from about the early 1970s, mid 1970s. In line with the development of what was known as the delta wing aircraft in sort of military aircraft, where again, this classic what's that stealth bomber thing, which is very sort of triangular shaped. And so what you can clearly see from this that the aliens mimic the technologies that humanity is doing so as to blend in more effectively with what we're seeing in the night sky. There is a strange dip here, which I think it's 1995. Bad year for triangles, 1995. Bad year for triangles. Good year for the second series of the X-Files. Not good for triangles. Not particularly well explained, but they've sort of steadied off since that point. But that's where we start to see a much greater representation of the other category coming forward. So maybe people are being more diligent in how they report the shapes from that point onwards. So that's our descriptive statistics. We haven't really done any statistics at this point. We've just gathered numbers and we've just put them up onto a graph. And yeah, you can publish that in a paper, but is it really satisfying? So let's see what other veins of madness we can tap here. So we've got this, but we haven't done any science. We've just observed. By using inferential statistics, we can take these observations and predict or explain different phenomena. And there's two major schools of inferential statistics. There's the frequentist style, which is the most traditional style. If you've done p-values and you've done null hypothesis testing, this is your frequentist statistical school. The alternative is Bayesian statistics, which gives us some certain philosophical advantages. And we're going to see how we can apply these to what we're looking at here. So this is the core of Bayesian statistics. There is the Reverend Thomas Bayes himself, the original conjugate prior. That was a combined religious and statistical joke at the same time for people that got it. But basically, this is a relatively uncontroversial result of the laws of probability, that by taking some data and some theories about the parameters, you can turn those round and turn them into a set of explanatory variables, the coefficients that describe how the variables and your data can be produced. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want you to leave the room before I'm finished. why have people started to use Bayesian inference in the modern world? One of the philosophical advantages, or one of the nice things about Bayesian statistics, is that it treats probability as a degree of belief. What is the likelihood that something is going to happen? What do I believe is going to occur from this? Whereas your traditional frequentist statistics, they're frequentist. They look at frequencies. They're dealing with long-term. If we ran this experiment 1 billion times, what would be the average set of outputs? So there's a nice philosophical underpinning there. Another thing that's nice about Bayesian statistics is you can bring in new data very easily. If you take this sort of equation that allows you to sort of churn data through to update your explanatory power, what Bayesian statistics lets you do is you say, we've got to a new place, we're going to put more data in and improve our belief in various areas. And it also gives you some nice outputs in that rather than a point estimate, rather than a single value at the end, like what is the most likely X, what is the most likely Y, it gives you a full probability distribution to play with. So you can do more sort of subtle analyses further on. And another feature of it, which I'm going to use a little bit here, is it lends itself to something called hierarchical models, where you can have certain features correlated and certain features left apart. We'll talk about that in a minute. Why don't people do Bayesian statistics all the time? Well, one of the real difficulties is that calculation of this full probability distribution is very computationally expensive. And so until fairly recently, we haven't had the computers or the algorithms to do it very effectively. But nowadays, computers getting faster, more data being available, and we've got better and better tools. And particularly one that I used a lot for this kind of stuff is a tool called STAN, which is a language that lets you express statistics programmatically, and it does the rest for you. So some questions we might want to ask. You know what, I'm going to take this coat off because it was a lovely idea. Right. So some questions we might ask. Do these extraterrestrial visitors prefer certain places? Do they like to go to one place or another? You know, do they seek out the beautiful landscapes of Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, or do they you know, go up to the Highlands of Scotland? And also, how does their interest change over time? If there are more people in the area, you know, going back to this population idea, does that attract them when there are more people there? And so we can start to build a series of mathematical models to ask this kind of question. This is something that will be familiar to many people who've done statistics in any form. This represents, for every state in the United States, a population count for the year in which the point was taken, and we've drawn a line of best fit straight through them. So you've done basic statistics, you'll be familiar with this, and this basically, you know, gives you a very, very simple way of predicting, you know, like if there were a certain number of people in an area, find out where the line is, that's your best estimate for where it would go. We've got some little error bars there. But actually, that simple linear regression is it's a little bit sort of mundane. It's a little bit boring. It makes a lot of assumptions about the data, but we can program it up like this. This is almost a direct representation of the program code that turns into this. So what we do is we say that the line is drawn from a normal distribution with a mean and a standard deviation, and we can put some explanatory variables into it here. And being Bayesians, we're going to put a prior in place of what we think the answers might be, and we'll run some code on it. Very, very simple, very, very basic. So there it is. But obviously, you can see some strange patterns. What are these lines going up? Well, these lines of dots going up here. And we've lost a lot of information there. So if I color these by state, what you can see is that obviously this represents states in the US over time, and their population's increasing. And so we've got these sort of nice clusters. We've got, you know, these are the population of this state, this is the population of this state. So what we then want to do is say, well, let's not draw it for the entirety of the United States. Let's do a per state analysis. Let's draw a line through each state. And so all of a sudden we can sort of say, okay, if this particular state's population increases, we can predict how many more sightings we might want to see there. But there is also a problem with the normal distribution, this basic distribution that you use for these statistics, in that it treats numbers as sort of fluid values, real numbers. You can have a value of 2.34612. but you can't have 2.34612 sightings of a UFO. You know, you can have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So we have different distributions, probabilities beyond the normal distribution that are better for this kind of count data. The most basic one is called the Poisson distribution. I love it when people, yeah, I know the Poisson distribution. I did use one of those, but they quickly jumped through to another one, slightly more flexible, called the negative binomial distribution. So rather than building our regressions on the basis of the normal distribution, we built it instead on a negative binomial distribution, which allows us to deal with counts more effectively. It has some nice properties, like, for example, it will never predict that there'll be -1 counts of something, which you obviously wouldn't want to see. We wouldn't want these statistics to be ridiculous. Having done that, there is now a further thing we can do. We can say, okay, there are different states, but they're not completely independent, are they? You know, there's one state is near to another state, one of them behaves a bit more like another state. And so there's this wonderful thing you can do called partial pooling on your data. Well, what you do is you say, sightings within one state are strongly together. We use those in our models. But if there are other states that sort of correlate highly, we can use those to add value to our inferences, to add to our probabilities. And so beyond the basic negative binomial, we can do a partially pooled version where we take each state's values and we kind of correlate them with each other. If you want to know more about this, come and talk to me. If you want to do your thesis research on alien sightings, come and talk to me, but don't tell anyone about it. And ultimately, this is what we get. We get a per state prediction that uses a sensible probability distribution and is represented by the fact that these are no longer straight lines. They can actually curve to go alongside the data. And so we have these predictions for each state. If you increase the population of Ohio by 10,000 people, apologize, and then but this, what will happen? How many alien sightings? We apologize to anyone from Ohio who's in the room. But so what we get is we get this. We get a per state representation of the baseline number of sightings, what we call the intercept on the graph of, you know, this is kind of theoretically, you know, if there were 0 population, what would be the basic level of sightings you'd expect to see? But more interestingly over here is the slope of the graph. As the population increases, how many more sightings do you get? How much does it go up? And, you know, you can all look to your favorite states to look this up. But there's a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me initially in this. The first one, of course, is California. Yeah. Very tight error bars, very good statistics. We know exactly there, but a very, very low slope. The aliens are done with California. We're all done with California. There are others. There are others around here. You know, again, I think, wait a minute, I always forget which one. It is Utah, yeah. So Utah and California, as always, very closely aligned. Yeah, statistically speaking. But the one that really, really jumped out at me is Delaware. They're into Delaware. You know, this is, you know, I think there's a sort of tax-free thing going on in Delaware. Yeah. I love it when you're in a room with social scientists. It's like, oh, there's a tax thing. Yeah. So this is the thing. Like, if you want to see the greatest shift in alien sighting increases in the United States, keep your eyes firmly fixed on Delaware. Probably a statement that no one else has ever said in the history of humanity. I mean, this is the main sort of focus of where we've got to with this at the moment. What would we do from this point onward? Deeper data sources, get hold of the MUFON data, get hold of the NICAP data, enrich our data sets, and we can do more with this. Look further into the spatial implications. I did some descriptive statistics, some map plotting of this, but there are some excellent things that you can do. I've done in other areas that relate to actually answering the questions of how correlated spatial areas are with each other. What other factors could go into this? You know, do they like higher temperatures? What about the altitude of sightings? What about the rainfall and precipitation of sightings? One of the things you can find if you look into UAP lore is that there's a belief that the 37th parallel geographically is strongly associated not just with UFO sightings, but the associated cattle mutilations that go with them. There is in fact a book called The 37th Parallel, and I'm sure the author would appreciate the royalties. It's not me, it's something else. What other things? Obviously, we did some sort of analysis here, but we didn't do any real-time series analysis. We treated each state in its growing population as independent, when in fact they're correlated previously. So any time series analysts would be horrified by this, as we all should be. But this is the sort of thing we can link into. Are there significant changes at a given moment? Are there significant points where things shift? Politically speaking, are they associated with certain political affiliations? Which administration was in power at different times for different sightings? And more inference to try and predict this stuff. So, to conclude, to say the final few things on this. Of course, the real horror was the statistics we learned along the way. The finding at a basic level, this belief that increased documentation and smartphone usage has resulted in decreased UAP sightings is completely false. It has in fact increased massively alongside in the smartphone era. And in fact, on a purely personal level, if you are ever out and you see an interesting helicopter in the sky and you put your phone up to it and try and take a picture of it, I can guarantee that you're going to get a classic blurry photo. We're going to throw out this report from it. So it's not that surprising. But from looking at this, we can see clearly that data, analysis, visualization, interpretation, they're all subject to our own prejudices, our own prior assumptions about what the data is trying to tell us, and our own interpretations of what these statistics say. So as we move forward down ever further into this dark world, trust the methods, trust the tools, trust the approaches, no matter where they take us. But be aware of our priors, be aware of our prior assumptions, be aware of where we're starting our analyses, and always question why we're asking the questions that we're asking. And ultimately, we can always believe that the truth is out there within a certain given credible interval. So I will finish there and open to any questions. Thank you. Oh yeah, there is a microphone. And and once again, I'll remind you that this lecture is being recorded for training and quality purposes.
Thank you. That was awesome. I like to avoid Delaware.
So yeah, yeah.
How did you collect the lovely engravings, the illustrations? How did you choose them?
I refer you again to social life and the lack thereof. No, so okay, I'll tell you the story, actually, interesting enough. I was at as a young, I think I was either a PhD student or a postdoc. I was at a conference and there was a psychoanalyst there who was doing a talk on security. And he gave a presentation and every slide had this abstract art on it. And I loved it. I looked at it, I've been watching boring slides all day. I went and spoke to him afterwards, and he was this, if you say Italian psychoanalyst, that image you've got in your head was him. Yeah, that image you just had, it was perfect. And he said, like, from a psychological perspective, if you say something to people, they don't want to be reading the words that you're saying, they can read faster than you can talk. But if you associate an image with it, then they've got something to look at and it hooks the concept into their mind, however they hook it on. And so I came back and I started picking random images, like royalty free from Flickr. But then over time, I started moving towards these like classical things. They're all out of copyright. And each one is like a mini cryptic crossword clue. Everyone has got there's a reason why. It could be a very, very obscure reason. But I now, just after many years of doing this, I have a huge library of stock images that whenever I make slides like this, I put them there. So thank you for engaging with the substance of the talk. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Looking at
Oh.
Looking at that interesting data visualization that was like hand drawn from the US government, yes, where they put like different newspaper articles, etc., etc. And then there seemed to be like a spike afterwards. So it seems like potentially the aliens might be reading our newspapers or might be responding to what we're talking about, maybe even right now. Have you considered taking this forward into the present day and looking at these types of effects of newspaper and then aliens coming to the world now?
I think what's interesting, I think there's a really, really interesting idea there in that the lag time between this, you effectively put a bound at the speed of light on how far away they could possibly have been, because as far as we are aware, the speed of light cannot be broken in any physics we understand. So if there is a consistent lag and it's maintained that over the years, then it does effectively, so that can answer some very important questions like, is this coming from within the solar system, or is this, truly sort of extrasolar?
Have you done that math?
Not off the top of my head in the last 20 seconds, but I'm working on it. But no, these are great, because these are the questions that lead to more posts on the blog and more things like that. So yeah, it's a great point. So time lag between the effects is really good, and again pulls us back to the time series analysis here. Again, I don't know to what extent Project Blue Book went into a full statistical analysis of their data, because I think they were drawing the sort of very obvious correlations here. But this is the quest. This is what we've set ourselves to do. So great point. Send me an email. We can co-author. Anyone else, or is it time for the pub already?
Thank you.
I have a question more about the archives that you used. So A, where were they housed? B, how long did it take to comb through? I'm presuming that they were print. How long did it take to comb through and pull out the different characteristics of each of these sightings going back from 1912 to today? And then did anyone give you any suspicious looks when you were requesting them?
But suspicious looks kind of roll off me at this point. No, actually, in fact, when this was one of the first data sets that I used when I first started the blog, and the data set that I used at that time had already been gathered by there was a sort of public archive of so it's the National UFO Reporting Center archives. To update that, they do have all of their archives, all of their reports are public on the website. So you can just go to, I think it's newfork.org. You can just go there directly and click on individual reports. They do, as many sites do now, sort of prevent large-scale scraping and things like that. So as with much of this stuff, the ideal is to contact them and say, like, I want to do this kind of stuff. Can you let me have the archives? And depending on sort of how you present and how you kind of say why you want to gain access to it, you can get access to this. In the one that was more sort of interesting is on that front is this one. This data set was taken from a UK-based site called the Paranormal Database.com, where I did have the data earlier, but I contacted the person who runs this site, and he was incredibly friendly and incredibly helpful, and sent me the full backend database and said, there you go, if you can help me improve it, it's grown up over time. So I'm very grateful to him, and in fact next year's lecture will be using that data much more extensively. I sadly didn't get time to do the analysis I wanted this year, but as a general rule, combing through the physical archives isn't something I've had a chance to do with this stuff, but the available data out there is something. And for a lot of this stuff, the interesting thing is not just the raw data of the UFO sightings, it's the contextual and subsidiary data sets that you incorporate into your analyses. So as I said, if you want to do an analysis of, do they visit in hotter periods, as was documented in the is it 1987 documentary film Predator, where they but they say, like, it often comes in hot years. When there's a hot year, then it comes, that kind of stuff. Climatic data, you can get that from large scale data sources, and pulling those together is in many senses more of a concern than the base data itself. But yeah, no, I've never been accosted for trying to get hold of this data today.
Not yet. Anyone
Are we
else?
done? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. You mentioned at some point that the aliens are tricky. They hide as triangles, copying American aircraft. As a concerned citizen who wants to get the right reports and avoid sort of fake news, do you think the mainstream media does a better job of reporting on incidents, or is it like phones and social media and more crowdsourced information?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, if you are trying to avoid disinformation and misinformation, you've walked into the wrong room. I mean, I would say, you know, especially for something like this that is challenging the sort of widespread assumptions, you know, a major media outlet is less likely to be willing to publish something that would be seen as wild speculation. And of course, we can always go into the concerns that they may have for any kind of interaction. And I think this kind of understanding of, are there more sightings at certain political periods, could give us some insight into you know, how deep the rabbit hole goes into the military industrial complex. But I would say that for qualitative one-off reporting, you're probably better off with the non-mainstream media. It's only when large-scale stories break that you want to go to the large-scale media outlets. I would say certainly in the last couple of years, I mentioned the US anomalous phenomena task force. There have been some movements to report that at an official level, but again, the data is not available, and we'll see how strong a freedom of information request is against that kind of thing.
Hi, yeah. Could you go back to the plot over time that you made with population?
Which
The one with the yellow is smartphone.
This one.
Yeah. So it's been very convincingly argued that smartphones have been destroying a generation of young people because of their deleterious effect, especially on teenage girls and groups of people who are considered objectionable by John Haidt and other people on the American right. This also looks like the aliens might be involved in social media. And I'm kind of curious, can you expound on it? Do you think that the global health epidemic that is affecting young people, did you think that maybe it's not the smartphones, but maybe the aliens using social media?
I think that I would want to see a historical trend, because I would want to see how much the aliens were behind heavy metal music, and Dungeons and Dragons,
And Satanism,
and the rise of the novel, and reading and writing in the era of Socrates, to understand the deleterious. And so it's entirely possible that, as we can see from looking at antiquity, that every generation has been a disappointment to the ones that came before it. That the aliens have sort of possibly arrived in that golden era.
Okay, so banning smartphones isn't going to get rid of the aliens.
I think banning aliens, which is a very popular approach, I understand, in a lot of Europe at the moment. And cut that bit. Yeah, there was wait for the language.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Sorry, can you shift to the global map?
The
of
global
the-
map.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way I see there is less representation on the global south of the map. Do you think there is a bias in terms of data collection and digitalization from these countries, or do you think the aliens are actually racist and are more interested in Caucasian races, and then they go to Europe and America more?
Given that this is the National UFO Reporting Center, I'm willing to accept a certain level of bias towards North America, given the fact that it looks like a swarm of angry bees on this photo. And in fact, in the media, it looks like a swarm of angry bees as well. But I think there's an interesting point there on the economic angle. We've seen Delaware, a tax haven, exactly the place that they're currently most interested in. We can see that they have concentrated on the places with the greatest current economic and sort of sort of colonial history power in the world that we see today. It's entirely possible that the aliens are either attracted to that and seeking to govern the levers of globalization and power as we see it, or it could be that they've actually been the cause of it, in that they've identified a particularly virulent strain of political thought that they can exploit for their own advantage, and have caused that to become dominant in North America and Europe. So I think it's a very good point, and a very sober point to think about. So it could be that the hope for the world is indeed in the global south.
Yeah. So thing is that they're less like interested in like Saudi Arabia or China, which are economically very powerful. So the only remaining theory is racism.
Yeah. I'm not even going to follow up on that one.
They only go for the democracy.
See, these are all questions. You see, all of these, like, I'm going to have to watch this. I'm going to be making notes. There's going to be a whole flurry of articles. Yeah. Racism and democracy and extraterrestrial presence. Wonderful. Any more, or am I allowed to go to the pub now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming.